Hey, what's going on, everybody? Welcome back. This is the Money Pit. I'm Zach Jobe, and today, you guessed it, no, not the Turbo Kit. We're going to throw a V8 in here. You guys ready for that? Yeah, you weren't expecting that, were you? What do you mean? Yeah, I'm Zach Jobe. Oh, come on. I got the scruff, I got the blue-ish eyes. What do you mean? All right. Fine. Okay, I'm not really Zach. I'm Mike. Welcome back to the FM Garage. Today, we're going to talk about lug nuts and centering rings. So let's get into it. We don't want a V8 just yet, right? No, lug nuts are much more exciting. All right, here we go. Sorry for the mild disappointment. I know I'm not the dreamboat that you were hoping for, but we do have some pretty interesting things to talk about today with all of our lug nuts and centering rings. Before we do that, though, I want to remind you that if you haven't already, there are quite a few really cool, interesting episodes that Zach and the crew over at Donut Media have done that feature some of our products like our frame rails, our little big brake kits, and also our oil coolers, the most recent one that they covered in some of their installation series over at Donut Media and their Money Pit series featuring their NA Miata. So if you haven't seen those, roll on over after this video, check out the Donut Media guys, super cool videos, fun, interesting. You'll get lost in Zach's eyes. Be careful. So check them out. Lots of good, really fun videos to see over there on the Donut Media channel. Without further ado, let's talk about these nuts. Lug nuts. So we're going to cover lots of different things. It probably sounds like a boring topic, but there's actually quite a bit that you can learn about lug nuts. So I'm sure that most everybody here has seen your run-of-the-mill lug nuts, stuff that comes on stock cars. They're not anything too terribly impressive, but you can get all kinds of aftermarket options. So what's so special about lug nuts? Well, first of all, obviously they keep your wheels on. That's pretty important, right? But why are there different kinds of lug nuts? Well, for Miatas anyway, there's several different flavors that you can get. There are the stock style ones that are usually steel. There are also aluminum ones that are very lightweight. You can get them in quite a few different styles, different colors, but why would you want to? So lug nuts are important for keeping on your wheels, as I mentioned, but there's a few different things that you need to know to make sure that you get the right lug nuts. So lug nuts for Miatas, they're all going to have the same thread pitch. And what I mean is that they're essentially nuts, just like you would for attaching most everything else, and they go over threaded studs. So for all Miatas, all NA, NB, and C and D all use an M10 by 1.5 thread pitch. So if you're getting lug nuts, you need to make sure that your thread pitch matches. Pretty easy, right? The other thing that you need to know is that with any of these lug nuts, these are all ones that we've used in Miatas or have seen on Miatas here at the shop. They all have a very... So that's this angle that you can see, and this is the angle that interfaces with the wheel. So almost all Miata wheels, I'm sure that there's probably some out there, but all common wheels use a 60-degree conical taper. That means if you were to draw a line off of that taper, it'd be a 60-degree angle. That's most common with a lot of wheels, such as this Sparco. You can see it's got this conical seat down in here. This will vary based on whatever wheel that you choose, but 60 degrees is very, very common for this lug nut size and for most wheels that suit Miatas. So, let's talk about the different kinds of them. You've seen stock ones, they're bland usually, just chrome, or they're kind of ugly stock ones that don't have any covers on them at all. But why might you want something a little different? What other options are there? Well, as I mentioned, there are the aftermarket ones. There are also some options from the factory and that you can get from Tire Rack and different stores, AutoZone, that kind of stuff, that have locking lug nuts. So you can see these guys, there's just a few different types of locking lug nuts. They have different keyways or shapes that are either like some kind of an Allen or a Torx, or these ones that even have a really specific shape that you can't, they're flat, so you can't just use any random tool. You have to have the right key that locks into place. And these are used for security to varying degrees of success or not. It kind of depends. But, is it? Oh, sorry. Let me readjust there. But these lug nuts, these security lug nuts, are common if you live in areas where wheel theft is a prevalent issue that you have to deal with. There are very common ones that you've probably seen before, like these spline-style lug nuts. And they just have a very simple key that just slides down over the top of them like that. You can get these almost anywhere, very common. So lots of different styles to choose from if you wanted to do locking lug nuts for security purposes. But one of the more common things, especially for performance-oriented guys, or if you're doing track days or want to be able to swap out between different sets of wheels and tires, is to get aluminum lug nuts like the ones that we sell. So these are our aluminum lug nuts. They are made from a 7075 T6 forged aluminum. So they're very strong. They're not like a standard 6061. So it's actually a harder, stiffer aluminum, and that means that it's more resilient to impact. Now, you say that, but they are still aluminum, so you don't want to just go smash them around. But these are fairly strong. They'll still hold your wheels on. The other good thing about these is that it might be a little bit hard to see on the camera, but the threads inside on these lug nuts go down deeper. So this standard steel one, you can see it's maybe a ½ inch or so. But this lug nut, the threads actually go quite a bit farther down, another quarter of an inch, maybe a little bit more than that on the inside. They don't go all the way out to the end because that's probably a little bit overkill for most people. But the other cool thing about these guys is that they are knurled on the end here. So this helps that when you're installing the lug nuts, that if you've got these little short ones, stock style ones, and you've got a wheel with a pretty deep inset like this, when you put it on, you're constantly trying to finagle it with your fingers, and it's just difficult to get to. But if you've got these with the knurl, you can spin it much, much easier as you're taking them on or off, as long as they're not torqued down, right? So, let's see. Are we still... Oh, I'm still doing really bad on this. I'm sorry. See, not professionals like Zach wouldn't have these issues. So one of the questions we asked a bunch of questions on Facebook, Instagram, that kind of stuff. Does the shape really matter for the lug nuts? Yes, in some cases. In a lot of cases, no. There are many wheels like this Sparco that they have plenty of room to be able to put just about whatever lug nuts you want in there. One of the other common things that you'll see between aftermarket lug nuts is that they'll have a different hex size. And what I mean is that they are physically a larger size. This will require a 21, whereas this would require a 19 millimeter socket to go down over them to be able to tighten them. Well, if you're using a big fat socket on a wheel that has a really narrow well for that lug nut, you might not be able to get it to fit down in there and not contact the wheel and scrape it all up. So using a 19 millimeter or something usually a bit smaller than stock makes it less likely that you're going to damage a wheel. There are some wheels out there, I've owned a few, that you do need to have a very specific and very small lug nut. Sometimes you may be forced to use a spline or something similar because even though this is 19 millimeters, they're just that much smaller in diameter, and they use a very small diameter tool to fit down into position. So a lot of it boils down to, will it physically fit in the wheel that you want to use? The other part of it is that If you need to have access, or if you want them to have a little bit more recess so they don't stick out as much, it's really aesthetic choices, but at that point, the physical fitment is the most important, and besides that, having the right thread and the right taper to make sure that it'll interface with your wheels and hold them on correctly. So, another question that we got is, what best practices are there when you're dealing with lug nuts? So, for a street car, they're relatively maintenance-free. You don't have to worry about them so much. If you're taking your wheels on and off all the time because you're going to track days, or if you're doing a lot of swapping wheels for different seasons because you use winter tires or what have you, it's always a good idea that you at least check them whenever you're pulling your wheels off and on again. Make sure that the taper isn't all scoured up or isn't starting to get rounded or something goofy. You want to also make sure that if you're using aluminum lug nuts and steel lug nuts, that your threads aren't pulling out. If they are, that means that you likely put them on with an impact gun. You didn't tighten them, or you didn't get them started by hand, and so you cross-threaded. Pretty basic stuff. If this is on a vehicle that you track a lot, or if it's something that you are constantly swapping wheels and tires because you're just a maniac and you have a set of wheels for every day of the week, you really need to be careful, because every time you take the lug nuts on and off, you are potentially damaging those threads. So it all boils down to how many times or how often you're pulling them on and off. If it is a track car, especially that you're doing this with, it's probably a good idea that you have a set of spare lug nuts, or even plan on replacing them maybe once a season or once every other season to be on the safe side. They're usually pretty cheap. A set of these, depending on where you get them, might run you $50, $65, $70, something like that, So every season, every other season, if you're a track rat, it's probably not a bad idea, just to make sure that you don't run into any nasty issues while you're on the track. Safe insurance, or cheap insurance anyway. Seems like we've got a question. What's our question?
Is there anything that you can use to not damage the exterior of the aluminum lug nuts?
Good question. We did get that a lot. That was actually next topic. It's the lug nuts, especially aluminum ones. You can see this is black because it's anodized black. And that anodization is strong, but it's not as strong as, say, steel. So obviously, if you're not careful, or even just over time using your sockets on it, you can wear that anodization down. If you've got a really ill-fitting socket, ill-fitting socket, you can actually even round corners. You can smack the faces or other features on your lug nut, and it'll wear off that anodization, or even kind of dent your lug nuts. Now, that may not really affect how they're used, except for it may make it a pain to get the lug nuts on or off, and it may make them ugly. So a lot of times with aluminum ones especially, I like to use a chrome vanadium style socket like this one. You can see this one actually has nylon or ABS or some kind of a plastic on it that protects the wheel. Not all of them will have that, but you can get some that have that, and even have some on the inside as well to protect your lug nuts, so that way they don't get banged up. But using a chrome vanadium socket, whenever you're first torquing them down, or whenever you're breaking them loose off the wheel, will help prevent that kind of damage that you might get if you just took a socket that was an impact socket. They usually have a little bit looser of a fit, and that impact motion over and over and over is what typically will cause that damage. So you can do that with an impact socket. They are safe to use it, but over time with extended use, you'll probably deform them a little bit if you're not careful. So I use a chrome vanadium socket to break it loose, and then use a gun, with an impact to pull it off the rest of the way quick and easy without having it just beating the crap out of these guys. So good question. That's very common. If they get to the point where they're just stuck in there, you can't get them out, probably time for a new set of lug nuts. Other than that, torque specs. So for most all Miatas, unless you're running a very, very different odd off-roading wheel or something funny, generally you're going to be using a very relatively low torque spec. For all Miatas, we recommend 85 pound-feet. Our lug nuts are actually laser engraved with that torque spec in case you have a senior moment. Not that any of us have that, right? But 85 pound-feet is plenty for road-going Miatas and even track-prepped Miatas. If you're using a very different wheel, again, if you're using some kind of a racing off-road wheel, it might be different. You probably will also run into issues using different lug nuts that have a different taper and or different threads because you're using different studs, in which case that kind of scenario you'd want to check with the manufacturer of your wheel and see what they recommend. Also, different lug studs may have different torque specs. Like these ones, this is just a stock one. We also carry the ARP extended length studs that are just 1.25 inches longer. Same thread, similar kind of design, same torque spec as far as the lug nuts are concerned. So for 99% of Miata owners, it's 85 pound-feet. No big deal. All right. I think we've got one more question here on lug nuts before I move on to hub-centric rings, so let's go ahead and check that out.
I got a couple.
Oh, a couple.
Might have been touched on, but advantages or disadvantages of steel versus aluminum, particular to a race car.
Well, that's a good one. So the question was, are there advantages to a steel versus an aluminum lug nut? And specifically for race cars, but this is kind of applicable to any Miata, really. The big advantage really is usually you can get away with a lighter weight lug nut that has more threads, so you get more thread engagement on your stud. That's assuming that you don't run out of stud anyway, but usually a lot of race cars are prepped with the extended length wheel studs from ARP or similar. So if you want more thread engagement, which means that it's more likely to hold on for longer, the aluminum lug nuts usually have or are designed with more threads, longer threaded section. That's always a plus. Of course, there is the weight difference. Even though this is a smaller lug nut, it weighs probably twice as much as an aluminum lug nut. We're talking an ounce. So if you factor that you lose 16 ounces if you do a set of aluminum versus steel, yeah, you're shedding some weight. It's race car things, right? Because race car. But it's not a dramatic difference. The main difference is that you're going to have a longer lug nut that's easier to get at with a socket, usually a deep socket, and it's also going to have more threads. So better for most race cars. If you check your local racetracks, HDPE days, whatever, a lot of them are going to be running aluminum lug nuts. It's pretty common. Did we have a second question on that?
Yeah. What's our opinion on extended studs, aside from being able to run more aggressive wheels?
So question on, are extended studs for everyone? What's our opinion or our thoughts on those? That is something that if you're racing is definitely a good idea. The stock studs are good. They're very strong. There is a possibility for failure with fatigue over time with putting those lug nuts on and off, on and off, on and off. And also the stresses of all the G-forces and the wheel being flexed as you're going around the track, throwing the car around. You can potentially snap the stock studs. So doing like the ARP extended length studs, they are made out of a stronger, tougher material. So not only do they give you more thread, which you could have more engagement with your lug nut, but they're also a good item that you want to install for not losing a wheel on track. If you're one of those guys that wants to go all out and really hammer your car on the track, which we all do, right? So for ease of for security, you don't want to drive back into the pits on your brake rotors, right? So for track rats especially, but even for occasional use, it is a good idea. Now, the downside to these is that obviously the ARP extended length studs are more expensive than just getting stock studs. You also have to press these in and out, which usually requires a hydraulic press and usually requires taking the hub assembly out of the car, take all your brake stuff off, disconnect your control arms, all that kind of stuff. So it's a bit of a process. You can push the old ones out and pull the new ones through with washers and lug nuts and stuff, and you can do that with some success if you're careful. The problem that I found usually with that kind of method by pulling them through with a lug nut is that when you pull them through, they may or may not be perpendicular to the surface. Using a press and pressing it down flat is usually the most reliable way to make sure that your stud pokes through the other side perpendicular and not at all kinds of different funky angles. Any other questions on that one, or is that it?
There's a couple more I think will be easy to answer.
Wow, I didn't know everybody was so excited about Lugnuts. That's pretty cool. Take that, Zach. What do we got?
I'll rephrase these.
Oh, okay.
What brand of Lugnuts do we offer?
What brand of Lugnuts do we offer? Flyin Miata, of course. Yeah, we only carry just the one Lugnut. This one, we have carried a couple other brands and a couple other designs in the past, and this particular brand has been this particular style has been by far the most popular and commonly purchased one, which generally means it's the one that people want to buy. That's why we carry just this one style. We also like it pretty well because it's very easy to use. Can we move? Okay, let's move on. If there are any more questions about Lugnuts, we'll get them in the comments. Also, hubcentric rings. That was another pretty common one to have questions about. So I've got a few examples for you here. We've got steel. Well, I'm sorry, these are aluminum. Excuse me. I'm sure there are steel ones out there, but you've got aluminum and plastic are generally the most common kinds of hubcentric rings. You probably are looking at these if you've never used them before and think, well, what the heck are those? So hubcentric rings are basically for when you buy an aftermarket wheel and this hub bore isn't quite the right size to match on your hub here. So every stock Miata has this lip. This is called the hub lip. And this lip is a specific diameter, and stock wheels will slip right over it, perfect fit every time. But if you do aftermarket wheels because you're looking to get a wider wheel or you like the looks of this or whatever, a lot of times this bore is designed by the manufacturer to be larger so that way it can fit a wider array of different vehicles. Basically, it gives them more options to sell to more markets. So in these cases, you need this adapter that'll fit in here and that'll neck the size of this bore down appropriately to fit your hub. So this one in particular is not the right size. There's several different bore diameters for different wheels and manufacturers, and so there are all different sizes of thicknesses, basically wall thicknesses for wheel spacers that you can get to suit different applications. Now I'll show you what we have over here on the car. This spacer, that's essentially what it is. It's a diameter spacer. Just slides in place like that. See how it just fits right over the lip? And basically, this is just an adapter for that wheel to sit on there properly. Let me show you one that actually has the right size for this particular car. This is just a generic one that came with a set of wheels that we had. But see how it's actually much thicker. That wall thickness is much thicker than this one. So there's all kinds of different sizes that you can get. But they all do the same basic purpose. They have a nice fit over that hub. And then I'll show you on this wheel. Oops, bumped the mic, sorry. That you can see it just fits right in the back of the wheel. That's all it does. It's just an adapter. So why do you need these? Why do you want them? What's the big deal about hub-centric rings? So hub-centric rings are sometimes important, depends on the wheel, and also depends on the car. So in many cases, a lot of the wheels are specifically designed and machined to be lug-centric, not hub-centric. Okay, what does that mean? Well, lug-centric means that it takes the lug nuts, and as you tighten them down, this wheel actually centers itself on your hub because of the lug nuts. A well-designed lug-centric wheel doesn't actually need these hub-centric adapters. Now, if you get wheels that are specifically designed to be hub-centric, or if you get wheels that may not be super great quality, then you'll want a hub-centric ring. Now, why does that matter? The whole reason behind being centric is that when you're going down the road, you want your wheel to spin right on the center of the wheel. You don't want it to be wobbling around as you're going down the road, because that makes for a bad time and uncomfortable vibrations, right? So the whole idea behind using either hub-centric or lug-centric, depending on how the wheel's designed, is so that your wheel is rotating around a single point rather than in an egg shape or something else. So if you have good, high-quality wheels that are lug-centric, you may not need hub-centric adapters. If you're not sure, they're cheap. Hub-centric rings are really inexpensive. You can get, several different kinds. Like we offer these aluminum ones, nice quality. You can get generic ones. There's also even plastic. So why would you want plastic, or why would you want steel or aluminum or whatever? If you're driving on the street, it doesn't really matter. Any of these will do just fine. The problem comes is that if you get plastic hub-centric rings and you're driving on the track, they start to get a little gummy, and they don't stay circular. They'll melt. Ask me how I know. So if you're driving on the track, if you do some pretty intense canyon runs, mountain runs, whatever, you probably want to get a metal one, preferably aluminum, because they're lightweight, right? It's all about that gram strategy. So different materials, they suit different purposes. If in doubt, get aluminum ones. They're still going to be pretty inexpensive. We do sell, as I mentioned, we do sell these guys. They're on our website. If you search for hub-centric or centering rings, they should pop up on the website. One of the questions we got was, is being lug-centric bad? And I kind of touched on that earlier. No, it's not bad. That generally, most common modern wheels are actually designed to be lug-centric, meaning they don't necessarily need these rings if they're done correctly and in a high-quality manufacturing facility. So lug-centric wheels, that's probably 90% of the market of wheels that will suit a Miata. You can get into the weeds a little bit on this, but more often than not, if you go look at the manufacturer specs for your wheels, they'll probably say that they're lug-centric. One of the questions that they also had gotten previous to the video is, do you need rings or hub-centric rings if you're also running wheel spacers? Maybe. Again, if your wheel spacers are a good tight fit and you have either a little bit of the lip that pokes through, well, here, I'll show you in this guy. If your wheel spacer goes up taller than this lip, then basically you lose any benefit of this lip centering your wheel. So if that's the case, your wheel spacers either need to have a lip on them, if your wheels need to have the centering ring effect, or sometimes if you have a little bit of a wheel spacer and you only have just a little bit of lip on it, you can use your adapter and it'll still catch that lip. Does it need it? Maybe. Again, high quality wheels, probably not. If you want to be safe than sorry, get a set. Again, they're not expensive. That's all of the questions I had. Do we have any other questions coming in through the comments right now in the video?
Recommendation on how to properly torque wheels. Pattern.
Good. Excellent. How to torque wheels. Let's do it on this one. Spacer, or hub-centric ring, rather. So, just like that, perfect fit. So, even though you can see the studs are moving around a little bit here, they're actually not changing position left, right, up, down, any of that kind of stuff, because that centering ring is holding it there in place. And really, if you were to call up and ask me, would you recommend hub centering rings? This is where they're most useful. If you want to use them just to make it easier to get your wheels on and off, compared to with it without that hub-centric ring. See, now I can move it around up, down, left, right. So it makes the initial installation process a little bit easier if you got that hub-centric ring. Thank you. Use the force to recall that guy. So now, let's go ahead and put this on here. Torquing them down is a pretty straightforward process. I'm sure most of you have probably heard of using or torquing wheels down in a star pattern. So let me grab the lug nuts. That's all right, it's fine. Because these are free with the wheels, we're going to use these guys. Thank you. So when you have just 4 lug nuts, 4 lug studs, or lug nuts and studs, whatever you got. If you're a Volkswagen guy, I'm sorry. You want to tighten these guys down in a crisscross or star pattern. Now you only have 4 lug nuts, so it's not much of a star in this case. But I like to start these all by hand. I do not recommend starting them using your impact gun or any kind of powered tool. That's a good way to strip out studs and have to cut off lug nuts or damage your wheels getting them off. Ask me how I know. But start them all by hand, and once you've got them on here, sometimes I'll use an electric impact or something just to lightly run them down. Once they're in place and they're, hand tight basically, at that point you'll use a torque wrench and you'll do one, doesn't matter where you start, move across on a four lug, you just move straight across, tighten that one down, then you pick one of your other 2 remaining lug nuts, tighten it down, and then tighten down the last one. If you've got 5 lug nuts, you do it in a star pattern where you'd start again anywhere, and then you'd have 2, so you'd pick one of the 2 that are straight across from it, or close to straight across, and then you do a star pattern. That's it. Crisscross or star pattern is how you do it. Again, 85 pound-feet for lug nuts, steel and aluminum, unless you're running a really odd off-road rally wheel and tire combo, something like that. That's it. Pretty straightforward. Do we have any other questions about lug nuts, centering rings, tightening stuff down? I have satiated all of the questions. Excellent. Okay. Well, thanks again for hanging out with us here at the FM Garage. I hope that this has been informative and hopefully at least a little entertaining. Again, if you want some laughs and some good entertainment, head over to Donut Media. Really good content, great guys, showing off really cool projects with the Money Pit and several other cars. We'll have links down below in the video description if you'd like to check those guys out. And of course, links to all the products that we talked about, lug nuts, center rings, that kind of stuff, in the description below as well. Thanks, everyone. We will see you here in the FM Garage next week, same time. Have a good one. Keep on boosting.